2101's an online financial education provider. Our goal is to provide people with better advice to make decisions in their personal finance, and we do this by partnering with employers and super funds and not-for-profits like First Nations Foundation. And we've been privileged to work with yourselves, Phil, to help build financial well-being for First Nations people, and that is our topic today. Perhaps if you could give us a bit of background, first of all, on the work that First Nations Foundation does, might be a good start point.
Yeah, sure. So Foundation kicked off, way back when in, I think, the late 90s, sort of a partnership with CUA, almost equivalent to what we think of as an Indigenous bank. So they offered a lot of products around, bank accounts, savings accounts, personal loans, pretty much through WA and I think Northern Territory, built up to maybe 250 mil assets under management at the time. And it was really product focused. 2006, I think the charity kind of changed to more financial education and outreach. So one of the biggest events that we have is our big Super Day Out event, where we take Centrelink Tax Office, financial counsellors, super funds. We'll go out to Aboriginal communities and we'll help them essentially find their lost super and potentially roll it over into one account. We've been doing that for the last 6 years, missed last year for obvious reasons. Been to 21 communities and found 24 million in lost super over that period of time. So phenomenal outcome, getting that super back into the one account. We've got, the reduced fees on that, as well as the compound returns from, being in the one account. We also do financial education, where we'll go out to community, we'll hold sessions, whether they're sort of, only a few people or there's 20 to 25 people, and we're just running, budgeting and sort of an introduction to investment as well. And just lastly, our last one is Tomorrow Money, real financial content hub designed for Aboriginal people 18 to 30 to kind of navigate through all those fun decisions in life that you make around that age.
And you've been with the First Nations Foundation since 2017, I understand. First of all, as treasurer and then as CEO since 2020. Can you maybe give us a little bit of background on your own experience? What led you to work with the foundation?
Yeah, sure. So that's right. Yeah, jumped on the board in 2017 and made transition to CEO start of last year, which is interesting time to have your first CEO gig. Before that, I'd spent 9 years in government with Department of Human Services, or as most people know, Centrelink, in a variety of roles. I worked as an Aboriginal community liaison officer out of Sydney, so Redfern, La Perouse, Darlinghurst, some of the really confronting kind of places, and managed the outreach team, the Aboriginal outreach team, all across Sydney as well. So that was my real first, I guess, forefront into Aboriginal community engagement and navigating politics and, the whole, working for government and trying to help community as well. After that, I did a financial role, so sort of similar to financial planning, but in a government capacity. So working a lot with retirees in that transition to retirement. So those two roles really gave me a good foundation. I've got the financial background, I've got the diploma in financial services, as well as that community engagement part. And just briefly before I jumped into this role, I was a business advisor, so really focusing on the strategy and the operational side of growing businesses. So I think those three just worked really well into the role that I'm in now.
Absolutely. So just turning to our topic, we know financial well-being's a problem for many Australians, as we've already heard in the discussion so far today. In fact, there's been studies that have shown at least 1 in 5 Australians are financially stressed. So that could be over 2.5 million people. Yeah. We know that has a major impact on a knock-on effect on family life, workplace, etc. Phil, in your work at First Nations Foundation, have you found that First Nations people are disproportionately affected by this poor financial literacy?
Yeah, for sure. So that's 1 in 5, 20% of, I guess, the broader population. We did some research called Money Stories with NAB Centre of Social Impact, all on our website to have a look at that detailed report. 48% is a number for Aboriginal people that are in severe or, a significant amount of financial hardship. So it's probably about 2.5 times what we'd normally see across the board. So if you've got Aboriginal staff or you're working with Aboriginal people, a good rule of thumb for this whole conference is maybe just double it. If we've got the hardship of family commitments and finance and that lack of education, it's going to be, at least 2x times what we're sort of hearing today.
So clearly that research and the work of your foundation shows that it is a major issue. looking towards the solution, is it greater financial education? Is that part of the piece in solving the problem?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. But what we do differently, we do the cultural aspect. I think there's a healing process that we need to go through before we jump into that financial education piece. So what we do with our training is we just go through and we talk about some of the historical policies and legislation and how that really impacted on Aboriginal people. So, we look at the stolen generation and the removal of Aboriginal people, and put onto missions. And the way that relationship worked is Aboriginal people were paid in rations. So it wasn't money to kind of budget and manage your finances. They were paid in, sugar, tea, flour, alcohol, tobacco, blankets. And that removal stuff happened right up till the 70s, right? So it's really kind of new and really relatively recent. So we've got that component where you've got rations and you can't manage things. We've got stolen wages where, wages were held in trust to be paid at a later date. And then we've got just those lower level entry kind of jobs where, the pay was enough to kind of pay for rent and feed the family, and that was about it. So there's no real kind of concept of making that money work. So with our training, we kind of go through that part. And there's a number of Aboriginal people that we train, and they just didn't realise that was the extent of things back then. They didn't realise about stolen wages. So it's almost a breakthrough sort of healing process, saying, it's not me as an individual. It's not me because of the race. It's just this historical stuff that's been stacked against us. And once they get that context, there's a real freedom or a sense of freedom from that. And then we go into sort of the money management and understanding finances, which at the end of the day, I think is really similar to who you go to. Budgeting's budgeting, the 60-20-20 principle or whatever it is. Ours is just really catering to that Indigenous culture part.
I think that's something that really comes out when you look into the work that you do at First Nations Foundation, the programs that take into consideration maybe different attitudes towards wealth between Indigenous culture and, I guess, Western culture, whether it's around, keeping and saving money, being more community focused, I guess you could say. Do you think people in different industries such as banking, finance, superannuation maybe need to better educate themselves about different aspects of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture, maybe be perhaps more adaptable in the way that they develop and implement the products and services that they release for that community?
Yeah, absolutely. The quickest way to sum it up is accumulation versus shared is sort of the differences. We've got the European and British concept of wealth accumulation through land, through property, through whatever investments. For Aboriginal people, it's usually what you can share, what resources can you share with the family and the community, and then you kind of think about the individual after that. So if you're trying to educate and provide these programs and products for Aboriginal people, and the immediate focus is on the individual, it's probably going to miss the mark compared to what can this mean for my family and what can this mean, for the community. And there was this concept that I'd read what they're doing in Canada, and it's called the 7th generation principle. And it's about what can they do now individually to help the next 7 generations for Aboriginal people over there. And I think that's a concept or something that these companies might be able to take and talk about. So rather than building superannuation for the wealth and retirement of the individual, maybe it's about doing it for the next however many generations and kicking them off, at least a bit better off than the previous generation, rather than that very much individual focused.
In terms of some of the success stories and sort of positive outcomes that you've seen coming out of your work in the community about financial education, improved literacy, what have you seen from the community? Do they respond well to the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, we're getting results now from sort of last year. We had a massive growth year last year. Just doing our budgeting and savings program and sort of eliminating debt. And we're getting people that are house ready now, ready to purchase their first home because they were able to, understand the concept of budgeting, looking at the leakages, and then understand that complex world of home ownership and what it takes. So we've got those really top end kind of stories where they've gone in, taken action, and they're now actually ready to acquire the biggest asset that most Australians will buy in a home. The other one is we do a train the trainer program where we train people from an organisation to deliver our stuff. We worked with a company called the Glen, Aboriginal Drug and Alcohol Rehab Centre in Central Coast, New South Wales. And that's part of their 12-week rehab program now. They have money talk sessions every Friday. The men are going through, they're getting clean, they're getting healed, they're getting better. And then they've got a basic concept of money management. So that's one of the really good, group case studies that we've had.
Mm. And how important do you think it is that it's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people speaking to their own communities? Because that's something that very much comes out of the work that I can see that you do at First Nations Foundation, which is making sure that it's not a top-down approach, someone coming in, imposing a worldview. It's very much a conversation. That's very much what I get from looking at your material.
It's conversation and shared experience. We can get people that are not Aboriginal go in there and sort of do it effectively, and it'll work. But there's certainly a shared experience that I've seen right across Australia, right across the different communities. We've all grown up in a similar way. We've got similar, experiences. And when we draw on that, and when our Aboriginal trainers draw on that in the training, we build rapport really quickly, we build connection, and then we get that trust that, what we're doing and what we're talking about is going to work and going to, better improve the community and themselves. So that's probably the advantage of having Indigenous people do that.
And in terms of, you touched on it briefly, obviously the pandemic's hit in the last year or so. I'm sure it's presented some significant challenges for yourself, obviously, but in terms of how First Nations people, their financial well-being has been affected by the pandemic, has it been exacerbated more so than the rest of the community, would you say?
Yeah, going into that, we had that data that suggested or showed that 52% of Aboriginal people had zero savings, and the ones that did have savings kind of lasted for maybe a month. So when we look at like last year in any situation like that, there's always this lag between when you lose your job or you take a pay cut, government responds, they put together a policy, and you actually get paid by settling. It's probably an 8 to 12 week period. So for Aboriginal people with no savings or no emergency savings account, there was this period of 8 to 12 weeks where they had to draw on different forms of finance. So whether that's, tapping into their superannuation, like a lot of people did, having a look at different forms of credit, whether it's payday lenders or some of those fringe credit providers. So that period of time just, I think, really, amplified some of those challenges that we see now.
Oh, hi, Tony. I was wondering when you were going
to look, I think this chat could go on for longer. You guys were really fascinating. And Phil, I think your comment just then about how 52% of Aboriginal people have no savings. I mean, it really strikes. It's a figure it's mind blowing, really. And the real challenge there is, yeah. And it's, hats off to Money 101. For really getting involved in this area. I actually checked out your exhibition booth last night, and Money 101 is really involved in lots of different sort of financial education programs. But this is really an extension, even at another level. And as I said, hats off to you. Thank you very much for Andrew MacNiven from Money 101, and Phil Usher. Thanks you very much for joining us today. It's been really a fascinating talk.